the best results when it comes to paid traffic campaigns in 2024 that are driving growth over to Spotify, Apple Music, so on and so forth. Any kind of top of funnel really is content that performed well organically. And then you plug that into your paid traffic campaigns. And that's really what can take you from middling results on paid ads or endless amounts of testing and spending money to get something right to something that really, really works.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 327. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. We're going to be talking today about music marketing and everybody's favorite topic these days, Spotify. And we're going to be talking about how to grow on Spotify. With me, as always, is Circa on this beautiful Tuesday. What's up, dude?
Not much, dude. I'm very excited to talk about Spotify.
Yeah.
Soup's excited. And I actually just last night typed out a monster response to a pretty simple query on one of our podcast episodes where they were like, we did a podcast episode where we talked about single releasing. And we had mentioned the audio analysis features of Spotify where you submit to their editorial playlist inclusion early and then they audio analyze your track and gets included in release radar. And he was like, I asked Spotify about this AI analysis feature. And I said, no, audio analysis. And he was like, oh, they said it didn't exist. And then I typed out this monster response of no, it definitely exists. Here's how it works. So yeah, Spotify's on the brain is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, it seems like Spotify is on everybody's brain the past couple days. I think Mr. Eck had some things to say about how creating content is cheaper than ever and how that applies to music. And then the whole music industry got either up in arms about it or apologetic about it, depending on which side of the fence you sit on when it comes to Spotify. But I don't really want to talk about that today. I just want to talk about growing on Spotify because we get a lot of questions about this and we've been having a lot of internal discussions about marketing strategies and the paid ad strategies that we use when it comes to helping artists grow awareness and, build up their following and their listenership on Spotify and other DSPs. And so we wanted to bring it to the show to talk about it today.
Yeah, we also just had a big old roundtable internally with the team about Spotify growth. So it's perfect timing.
Yeah, maybe we kick off there just to kind of clarify I don't want to call it like a position statement when it comes to Spotify growth and digital marketing, but maybe a soft position statement or like a general understanding of where we're at in terms of some of the things that we teach at Entrepreneur and the things that we employ at the agency.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what prompted our internal discussion was that there was some discussion between our coaches. Different coaches might recommend different things for different clients. So if you're a client of our coaching program, depending on the coach you get, they might be more or less likely to recommend certain strategies. And we saw that as a problem because it shouldn't matter what coach you get. You should get a uniform recommendation set. And the disparity was that one of our coaches had pointed out that hey, I had this artist who I've known actually for over a decade personally, and he's never got traction with his music, came on board the coaching program. We worked on building a Instagram Reels to Spotify ad campaign, maintained it. And over a period of months, it went from being unprofitable to being less unprofitable to being less unprofitable and is now profitable. And that's expected to continue to grow. And their monthly listeners are just compounding and growing, and they're now making more money than they put into ads. So they could scale ads and try to scale it up, or they could just keep it where it is and continue making money. One of our other coaches is, very keen on getting people to set up strategies where they're selling products directly to customers instead of focusing on Spotify. And we kind of netted out by saying, well, it really depends on the client, the artist, because there are some artists with more niche genre types or for whom content is not their strong suit, or maybe their image is a little bit more niche. Maybe the music is mainstream, but the image is niche. That also happens. In that case, maybe putting a bunch of money into Spotify just won't yield the kinds of results that I spoke about with that existing client where they went revenue positive or profit positive. So that's where we settled, is like, let's apply our discretion. If we think an artist that is a coaching client could scale to millions of monthly listeners, there's no immediate challenges with their content. It's pretty good. Their music is the right, it's in the public zeitgeist. Whereas like if you make a hardcore thrash metal polka, like probably not going to scale to millions of monthly listeners, right? So given those conditions, we should, take this little route, set up the Reels to Spotify campaign and let it compound, and don't have to maintain it too much.
Yeah, this is interesting because just a few episodes back when we were talking about myths when it comes to music marketing, I made a pretty strong and firm statement that I stand by still, that it is very hard, if not almost impossible, to get a 1-to-1 or greater than 1-to-1 return on investment when it comes to using paid traffic and driving listeners over to Spotify. And to clarify that a bit further for the purpose of this episode, when I say that, I especially and primarily am talking about in the initial stages. Can you eventually grow a listener base through paid traffic that does start to turn over a profit that is greater than what you're spending on ads, for example? Yes, you can. It takes a lot of time and you might incur a lot of losses depending on how much you're spending to get there. And so I still stand by that statement pretty firmly. However, with the artists that Cirque was just talking about, that one of our coaches at Indie Founder was working with, the campaign that they were running, Instagram Reels to Spotify paid traffic campaign, that was a very low budget campaign. It was spending like $5 a day or something like that. So it wasn't, burning a hole in his wallet or exhausting his budget too quickly insofar that it would be unsustainable for the long term. And I think taking into consideration the criteria that you mentioned there, and then knowing that, it gives you a bit of a firmer jumping off point to think about when it comes to your own strategy of where these types of campaigns fit or don't, and what kind of results you might hope to get from them.
Yeah, I mean, in that specific instance, right, we're talking about an artist who didn't have anything to sell. So that we couldn't just reach immediately for like, let's deploy a campaign where you're trying to get sales from new fans. Didn't have any physical CDs or merch. And so since it's going to take 3 months, maybe even more, to get to a deployed campaign where you're generating sales and getting customers, it also takes 3 or more months to see the compounding effects of a $5 a day or even smaller spend to Spotify. So let's set that up. Then while we're building these other more tentpole campaigns, that is starting to compound. And we get to a place where by the time you're ready to deploy campaigns that are meant to sell products, you're already in a pretty great place in terms of growth. And one thing that came out of that discussion was just that, like, any port in a storm, we have to assume we know nothing. And like, yes, we can make the assumption that it's better idea to get someone a channel for making money as an artist where they keep all the data, they make more money per customer or fan they turn on, and they're generating customers, not just, Spotify users that they can't contact, can't communicate with, can't do anything with. They just got to hope they keep streaming, right? But in this case, like, if it makes money, nothing wrong with it, right? So yeah, typically we adopt a posture of like, Spotify is kind of a data black hole. The money you can make from it is very small unless you can scale. But in this case, like, there are instances where just a very small spend over time can yield compounding results, and it could become a real channel for revenue.
For sure, yeah. And to take a little bit deeper clarity on my experiences and kind of feelings and actions towards Spotify driven growth ad campaigns, is when I'm talking about them, or who I'm talking about them with, is usually with artist managers, other marketers, or artists that are looking, or bands that are looking to work with us at the agency. And the cautionary place that I often come from is that type of conversation usually comes with some level of like, well, can you guys get the cost per click low enough or the cost per conversion low enough that it will net out to be more profitable per stream? And the answer to that is almost always no. And that's where my digging heels in, kind of statements come from is no, you're not going to get that. What you can get over time is, like you were saying, this compounding effect of listenership building up and building up and building up and snowballing into something where you're getting repeat listeners, you're getting algorithmic pop offs, people are bringing their friends into the fold and stuff like that. You're building an audience, but you're not just arbitraging cost per click against against streaming revenue.
Yeah, because of what we know about quote unquote the Spotify algorithm, which is it's a machine learning model, right? It's like ChatGPT, like it's like a GPT, except it's not transformer based. It's a model. In order to get that to sing for you, you really need to be giving it as much data as you possibly can. And the primary data that it likes is what's called collaborative filtering, meaning what are users doing with your song and what are those users like and what do they also like? If that's not happening, the other form, content-based filtering, won't take you very far. So it's kind of it's a zero-sum game. It's all or nothing, right? You either are doing it and you expect to see algorithmic results, or you're not doing it and you should not at all expect some kind of like compounding growth or Discover Weekly or radio or any of those types of recommendation-based growth sources.
Totally. Yeah. I think that that's a good point to bring up too. Now, before we get too into the weeds here of like the pros and cons and the cautionary tales and the reasons why you should try to grow on Spotify versus not, let's get into like what we're actually pulling out as far as playbooks go these days for Spotify growth when it comes to digital marketing. Because I think there's two main umbrellas that we can talk about here. We can talk about organic, right? And we can talk about paid traffic. Organic encompasses everything from organic social to traffic that you might drive through email marketing or messenger or text, anything that doesn't involve paying for advertising. And then you have paid traffic, which is paying for advertising. So we can get into two of those. I think organic is a good one to jump off with because we've spent a lot of time over the last few months on the show talking about building up your content strategy, especially with vertical videos and long form and what that can do for you. And so I don't want to retread that too much, but really when it comes to building an audience for streaming on Spotify, having an arsenal of great content around your music that you build up over time as you're releasing more music is going to be your biggest guns, your biggest weapons when it comes to gaining attention and getting that attention over to stream.
Yeah, 100%.
And we did an episode a while back, we'll link to it in the show notes, about building up a content strategy for kickstarting your fan base, where we really get in the weeds. Circa really did, I thought, a beautiful job of diving into how to build up a content strategy that really works these days, especially given the short form nature of TikTok and Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, etc. They can work really, really well. So we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. He also did a workshop on it inside of Indie Pro. What was that, like a month and a half ago, roughly?
Something like that, 2 months back, I think. Yeah.
So we'll make sure to link to that. But that's kind of umbrella number one, is organic growth. What's nice about that is once you've got that under your belt, that then gives you a lot of content to work with when it comes to paid traffic, for which we have a number of strategies that we've employed over the years, some of which work better than others these days. So we can kind of get into that now.
Yeah. Just to clarify, like the content strategy, right? The reason it's so important is because it's not the case that everything you put into a content strategy, finished videos, right, is just directly reusable for Spotify growth. It's actually the case that of hundreds of videos you might create in a content strategy, one or two of them will be ideal for Spotify growth, and you do not know which ones. Let's say that you do your content in batches of 30, right? The one you want to use for Spotify might be in the fourth batch, and it might be entirely dependent on what you learned in creating batches 1 through 3. So that's why the content strategy is really fundamental. And if you don't run it, you cannot expect to produce the types of content that work really great in, say, Reels to Spotify ads.
100%. Yeah. And we've seen this play out hundreds of times, both at our agency and in our coaching program, of the best results when it comes to paid traffic campaigns in 2024 that are driving growth over to Spotify, Apple Music, so on and so forth. Any kind of top of funnel really is content that performed well organically. And then you plug that into your paid traffic campaigns. And that's really what can take you from middling results on paid ads or endless amounts of testing and spending money to get something right to something that really, really works. Oftentimes, I don't even recommend running paid ads for a lot of artist clients until they have something that really starts to get some rolling traction. And that might look different for one artist versus another. For some, that might be 10,000 views on a video and a bunch of engagement. For another artist, it might be 100,000 views, depending on their size. So there's some considerations to make there when it comes to, okay, what's working best for you and what could work best for you. So that's a good jumping off point to talk about paid ad strategies. In the past, we've talked a lot about campaigns that we've called follower finders, which are essentially long form performance based content with a link over to Spotify. We've kind of moved deeper and deeper into short form vertical video territory over the last 3 years or so. And those are the kinds of campaigns that we typically see perform best. And like Circa's alluded to, a lot of it is Instagram Reels over to Spotify or Instagram stories, sometimes TikTok ads over to Spotify. And those are kind of the two main sort of players, with Instagram really being the strongest of the two. And then we can get a little bit into the weeds of like the tech behind it, because there's been some debating going on over the last year, I would say, where we've really gotten into that.
Yeah, I would say that the only reason that TikTok is a distant second fiddle to Instagram here is just because of the strength of the ad platform. TikTok is, Meta's Meta is an operation and they've been around. And so the tech powering their ad platform is second to none. And TikTok's really just playing catch up and not really doing it very fast. So that's kind of why, like, we don't do a whole lot of TikTok advertising, just because like the ad platform, the actual user base is strong. Content performs very well on the platform. It's just that the tooling behind the ad platform, it really just makes it, even though I would say the user base is more receptive to content on TikTok, the ad platform is so much worse that it makes it a worse option than Instagram.
I truly only recommend TikTok ads when something has gone viral, like 9.5 times out of 10.
Yeah. Even the TikTok ad platform can't ruin that.
Yeah, exactly. And truthfully, just to give some more insight into this, if you are experimenting with TikTok ads, the campaign objective that we've found to be the most successful when it comes to driving traffic isn't actually driving it off of TikTok. If you have a viral piece of content on TikTok related to your music, the objective that we most often use at the agency and recommend with our artists, though we test a lot of them, the campaign objective that we actually see the most success with is the community interaction objective. And we use that to drive profile views. And that kind of creates this snowball effect of a viral piece of content, a lot of organic traffic, paid ads on top of it, spending more money to reach more people, more of a snowball effect of people coming to the profile and then going over to streaming from there. So to get TikTok out of the way, that's a TikTok ad strategy that could be employed for Spotify growth. Now, getting into Instagram, which is where we really pull a lot of our playbooks in, Reels, stories, vertical videos, those are the primary two. A lot of times we're doing a combination of a few ad sets. Typically, it's fairly broad in the targeting. It might be an ad set with genre-based targeting, a few artists stacked in a separate ad set, and then broad so that you can reach younger audiences. Those three in a single campaign for cold traffic with, I would say, if you have 3 to 4 pieces of content, that can work really, really well. If you only have one that's gone successful and viral organically, great, that's fine too. That can often work really well for you, but this is typically what we go for. And then the campaign objectives, and this is where we can get into the, sorcery and kind of debate that's, I think, has been going on for a long time outside of Indepreneur, is whether you use traffic, meaning optimizing for cost per click and volume of clicks, versus conversions, which is optimizing for a conversion, which isn't actually on Spotify. It's usually on a bridge page where someone's clicking over to Spotify and then you trigger an event. We've been doing a good amount of testing on that since around the fall of last year, where we really started to see the deprecation of audiences, or the degradation of audiences rather, of traffic-based objectives. And so that's been an interesting sort of tug of war that we've been playing.
Yeah. This goes back a long way. We started off using bridge pages to register conversions. And what that essentially does is, in one model, the traffic objective, Facebook sees it as good. The goal of Facebook's ads or meta ads is to get someone to click on the ad. In a traffic campaign, the goal is to get someone to click on the ad. Whatever happens after doesn't factor into the optimization of the campaign. But if someone clicks on an ad, it says all the parameters that cause this person to click, the placement of the ad, the time of day, the user, where it was in the ad scroll, all of the different variables are then seen as these are successful parameters. When this happened, someone clicked. So that's a good thing. In the future, let's try to drift more towards these parameters and away from ones where people didn't click. And so that's how your ad optimizes. In a conversions campaign, instead, you use the meta pixel or the meta conversions API and put that pixel as a little bit of code, goes on your website. And when someone goes from an ad to your website, Facebook knows they clicked on the ad, then knows they end up on the website because that code is there to run and say this user made it to the website. Then if they do an action on the website that you have designated as this is the conversion event, then it says, okay, that was successful. And it takes all the parameters thusly. The difference in practice ends up being that the successful optimization events that Facebook gets from a conversions campaign are people who are a lot more committed to actually following through. Because if they clicked on an ad, waited for a web page to load, then clicked another button to then go to Spotify, it means that it wasn't an accident that they clicked on the ad, right? It's very purposeful. They clicked two buttons, which is more confirmation than if they just clicked on the ad. So the quality of the optimization events is better. The amount is lower. And so as a result, you might think, oh, I'll just go for conversions. But there are people, many people, who will not wait for another web page to load and then read and comprehend the web page and then find the button and click on the button to then go listen to your song on Spotify. Chances are they got other stuff to do, right? The less friction you can introduce, friction being like the other page loading, new page to comprehend, new button, wait for that. The less friction you can introduce, the more end conversions you will essentially get. Okay. So while Facebook is optimizing for a less certain event, it is getting a larger volume of those events. The user experience is less impacted. And so it's kind of hard to say which is better, which is going to result in a lower cost per stream on Spotify.
Not to mention, when you run conversion campaigns, your CPM is always going to be higher. That's your cost per mil. That's your cost per 1,000 impressions. So 1,000 eyeballs on your ad.
When you load your Instagram, right? First post you see is someone being recommended to you, either someone you follow or someone who follows you or just a random recommendation. As you scroll, you eventually see an ad. That ad was served because there's a slot in your scroll for an ad to be served in. And at the moment you scrolled to it, Meta decided, here's the ad that goes there. And it showed it to you. That's an impression. And wherever you are in Meta's platform, that's what an impression is. You buy them in bundles of 1,000 called millies, just like Jack said. And that's the base pricing for your ads. And just like Jack said, conversions ratchet that up. Okay. So you could end up paying $10 for 1,000 impressions through a traffic campaign or 20 for 1,000 impressions through a conversions campaign. Really depends. So yeah, it's there's a lot of factors that go into which is better. But the key thing for me to remember was that, hey, neither of these options are optimizing for someone listening to you on Spotify, because we can't, right? So all we're really doing is introducing more friction and considering someone more qualified if they go through that friction. I don't think that necessarily means they're more qualified or more likely to listen to you. It just means that they're more likely to do additional actions to listen to you. And so my theory for the longest, after we initially tried bridge pages, was let's just use traffic, because neither of these are really optimizing for the right event. And then eventually people, would come to us and say, I'm using hype edit landing pages. I'm using all these different bridge pages and running conversions. And I would say, well, here's my logic for why I wouldn't run conversions, why I would run traffic. But then we started to see at the agency as early as, I want to say, late last year, our own agency specialists were saying, hey, traffic's not doing as well as it used to. And you might think, okay, if we try conversions now and that solves the problem, then we know it's conversions is the best. But that's not the case, because these fluctuations could be seasonality, could be ads are just not performing well across the board. At the time we noticed it, we switched to conversions and that seasonality effect is over. And now we think conversions are better, even though it was just a momentary fluctuation in the performance of ads. There's a lot of factors to really determining like which is the best. And it might be the case that for every client in every situation, there's a different best. And to make things more complex, right when I was about to say, okay, traffic's not working as well anymore, let's just do conversions, I tried out a strategy that my friend told me about where I don't want to make this like any more complicated than it already is, but basically he had figured out that there's no advertisers bidding on audiences below 17 years old. So 13 to 17, you can't run conversions campaigns on them. So advertisers largely ignore them because advertisers want to run conversions campaigns. It's the like objective that serious advertisers want to run. As a result, since there's no advertisers bidding on 13 to 17, they're super cheap. So my friends were like getting like 5/100ths of a cent per click running traffic campaigns to 13 to 17-year-olds. And they have very 13 to 17-year-old music, right? The popular today current zeitgeist of music. And I was like, well, I have some music like that. My group, Some Kid Punk, we make like hip hop, pop, some punkish stuff. Some of these could fit in with that generation. So let's try it out. And as a result, I got the same results, right? I was able to like jack up my Spotify results for like $5. And I got a lot of hate as well, but the effect worked. And so to me, it was like, okay, this isn't really a traffic problem. This is listeners are costing too much for the music and the ad creative and the thing you're trying to do. It's highly situational and context dependent. But if I get a bunch of cheap impressions, that effect is nullified. Like my Spotify is still going to go up for very cheap. So it's really about finding the right parameters and less about what's better, traffic or conversions.
Definitely, yeah. And we actually just did a workshop on this as well. Andy, one of our account strategists at IndieX, did a workshop where he spent thousands of dollars testing between traffic and conversion on his own accord for his band and had some really interesting results. That to say, Andy did some really rigorous testing to see what was working for him. And what that led to is we've kind of pivoted not entirely to using conversions as an objective right now for paid traffic campaigns over to Spotify, but it is our first go-to in testing now. And then we can employ testing with traffic after the fact, as opposed to what used to be flipped, where we might start with traffic, see what kind of result it can bring in, and then switch to conversions as we need to pivot things around. And what's interesting about this, I think this kind of sums up nicely going back to an initial point that you brought up, Cirque, and something that we were talking about at the end of last week as we were just starting to have these conversations amongst the team, was you brought up a really good point in saying that like growth campaigns aimed towards listenership and followers and monthly listeners and streams on Spotify, those kind of digital marketing initiatives may have more to do with an artist's music, their content, their look, if they're kind of in the zeitgeist currently of what streams well, what you might cook up as being like, yeah, this person could have this artist or band could have 1 million monthly listeners someday. And that may supersede all of these more technical conversations about traffic, conversions, what kind of ad campaigns to run, when it really comes down to the artist, their music, their look, their content.
Yeah, I'd say that actually plays a much larger role than whether or not you take traffic or conversions. Another thing that might make conversions a better option is a lot of people are, when they're running conversions campaigns, they're using landing page services specifically for Spotify. And the difference between these is that when you click on a Facebook ad for a traffic campaign, it's essentially an Ahref HTML link. It points to a URL, and the URL is your Spotify play link, right? Whereas these landing page services that you might run a conversions campaign with, the buttons on them are actually JavaScript, and they run script. And that script, when you click that button, it says, okay, we got a user clicking this button. What device are they on? Are they on a mobile phone or are they on a desktop? If they're on a desktop or a mobile phone, what's the operating system? Given that operating system, can we see if they have Spotify installed on their machine or their device? And if it is installed, can we pull that up and have it auto open to the right song? Whereas when you click on a Facebook ad, it's going to do a whole bunch of janky shit, like send you to a website from Spotify where they then ask if you want to log in or if you already have an account. It's a bunch of additional friction. So the benefit of conversions campaigns is that you might be able to use a tool where the second someone clicks that button, it's opening right to their Spotify app on their iPhone, Android device, Windows computer, Mac computer. The button is a script. And so that is incredibly helpful. And something that I've begun to look into for facilitating for our indies is like, well, can we provide landing pages like that? Because that probably has a lot more to do with how well conversions do than the optimization type.
For sure. So I think that kind of hopefully gives you guys a little bit of a state of the union as far as the things that we think about when it comes to Spotify growth, your digital marketing, what strategies you should use, what we're kind of using at the agency in the coaching program, the things that we recommend inside Indie Pro, how that's evolving and shifting with time, and why we don't make fast, rapid statements about any of this stuff, because it can change really quickly, or it can be based on seasonality, like Cirque mentioned. And we wanted to kind of just come to the show today to present what's new and the things that we're thinking about and what we're talking about internally, to give you guys some guidance, some food for thought, some things you can be testing, stuff you can be working towards. And, the last thing that I'll say about conversions and traffic and what that often looks like is we're coming at this from a very different angle from how traffic versus conversions was originally or historically argued, at least for me, by other marketers, by other artists, when it usually came down to, or typically came down to in the past, like, I want to use conversions so that I can target countries where I will get cheap impressions and cheaper clicks. Typically what would be referred to as your second tier countries like in South America or in the Middle East. If you run traffic, you're going to get very cheap clicks, but it's highly unqualified. There was a concept of, if you run conversions, somehow you would get more qualified traffic from those countries and therefore be able to, again, arbitrage your cost per click or conversion against your cost per stream, which, as I said, isn't a thing that we try to optimize for at all. That's not the point of any of it.
Yeah. And hopefully this serves, like, we did get a little bit technical and in the weeds here.
Yeah, we sure did.
But like, really the takeaways here are, the most important thing is probably not what buttons you click on your meta ads interface. And it probably has a lot more to do actually with the content you're using to advertise and your intentions for the strategy and what you're doing. Hopefully this is another nail in the coffin for, like, yeah, if you don't have like great content, then you need to work on a content strategy before you think about advertising, and an approach that's more predicated on what's appropriate for you as an artist. Like, really take a critical self look and determine, like, of the people I see who have millions of monthly listeners, like, in what ways is my music and image similar and dissimilar to them?
100%. I think it's a big home run swing for the idea that now more than ever, your content is your targeting, your content is your optimization, your music is your targeting, your music is your optimization. So keep that in mind when it comes to any of these Spotify growth tactics. Come join us in Indie Pro if you want to learn more of this stuff. If you're not already part of the community, we'd love to have you. And go grow. We'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.